Welcome back, everyone. So today I am chatting with a friend of mine, Caitlin Mills. I give a little intro when we start the interview, but she is a good friend of mine, coworker of mine, and genuinely, if you want a healthy marriage, or if you want like practical stepping stones to get to a healthier marriage, listen to this interview. It was so incredible. She has such wisdom to share. And it's not just like the heady, how to have a nice marriage. No, she gets into the very nitty gritty practicals of increasing your intimacy with your spouse using what we'd call SPICE, which is an acronym. We'll get all into that as well. But it's an acronym for spiritual, physical, intellectual, communicative, and emotional. So, all different ways in which we can experience intimacy with our spouse. And so, we get into that, but I wanted to give this intro before we get into the interview because we did have a little bit of sound issues. So, throughout specifically more of like the first half of the interview, we had a little bit of sound issues, but you can still hear us great. So, if you can, yeah, I apologize for that. If you can get past that, we just had an incredible conversation. And genuinely, if you want the logistics of how to create more intimacy with your spouse, a more healthy, well-rounded intimacy with your spouse, I highly recommend that you stay tuned for this interview. Welcome to the Truth and Fertility podcast. My name is Haley and I am your host. I work at an OBGYN clinic where I teach women and couples how to chart their cycles so they can either achieve or avoid pregnancy and also to manage their fertility. I have a huge passion to teach women and couples about the beauty of their fertility and how the pill is never the answer to women's health. There's a lot of good and not so good information out there about fertility. And so my goal with this podcast is to help you sort out the truth from the weeds. I want to teach you how to chart your cycle and to reach your family planning goals while also maybe even possibly locating hormonal imbalances and to receive proper treatment. I want to help you get in the best hands that you can with the best doctors that you can to reach optimal reproductive health. So if you're ready to get on this journey with me to learn more about your reproductive system, how it was created and how it should be working, and the best medicine in order to make it work if it's not, then you are in the right place. Welcome to the Truth and Fertility podcast. So today we are chatting with a good friend of mine, also coworker, Caitlin Mills. She is also a fertility care practitioner along with me at the clinic that we work at, the NAPRO clinic. And she's also a longtime friend of my husband's. She knew my husband back in the college days, and she's actually the reason that I am a Creighton instructor. So there's a whole story there, of course, but I am so excited to be chatting with her today because she, first of all, is so experienced with this, just with teaching couples how to chart their cycles, but just walking alongside them. She is so personable, um, she just knows how to speak to people to really to meet their needs, to help them in ways that they really need. And I really admire her and her ability to teach and walk alongside people with their charting experiences. So I will let her introduce herself and we'll get into our topic. We're going to be talking about what we call spice, but particularly just talking about how the practicals of using a natural fertility system, family planning system within your marriage, because clearly it's not just a one and done type thing. This is something that you walk alongside your husband or your wife with, and it's not always easy, but this concept of spice that Caitlin's going to be talking to us about really gives that support and helpful system. So without further ado, Caitlin, why don't you introduce yourself and then we can go on into the conversation.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm so excited. Thanks for having me on. It's such a pleasure to
Yeah.
be with you. Yeah, so I have been a fertility care practitioner for just about 10 years, and I love it. it was a call actually that I heard really clearly from the Lord. And, you know, I don't know why, I heard it and I was like, wait, is this a thing? Is this like a real job? This sounds too good to be true. This is like so awesome. I remember Dominic, my second, was like 6 months old. And I just like went into prayer and I was like, Lord, do you want me to be just like at home or do you want me to work outside of the home? And yeah, I remember him very distinctly telling me, I want you to teach NFP and I want you to do it so that it'll bless women's health while also helping bless marriages. So it was like, you're going to teach married couples, you're going to teach single women, you're going to teach, I just remember him like giving me all the not stipulations, but all the points. Anyway, I was like, is this a real job? I was like, I love this. So yeah, been doing it for 10 years, love it so deeply. Every day is just like such a gift to be able to walk with these women and these married couples and hold their hearts. And it's honestly such a privilege to be able to share spice with them because what an incredible tool that we've been given. And so, yeah, I love it so much. I can't believe it's my real job.
Awesome. Well, let's dive into spice then. So when we say spice, Caitlin, teach spice as right now as you would be teaching a client because just you teach it so well. So explain to us what spice is and how you can use it.
Yeah, spice. It's funny. I usually bring it up. We talk about it in the third follow up, and I usually bring it up, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna talk about spice, and so they always go, "Ooh, spice." It usually kind of elicits kind of a funny response from people, but it's an acronym, right? So it's just an invitation to explore deeper, just human intimacy, and it's just that it's an acronym that stands for the 5 different ways that human beings really need to experience intimacy in order to feel intimately whole. And I think our society, in a large part, puts a really heavy emphasis on the physical, which is the P of spice, right? So each of the letters of that acronym stand for a different type of intimacy. We'll kind of talk more about that. But our culture puts a very heavy emphasis on the P for the physical aspect of intimacy. And that's just simply just not the only, and I wouldn't even say the best way to experience intimacy with another person. And so spice just kind of it just allows you to explore the other 4 beautiful ways of expressing and communicating intimacy and experiencing intimacy. Um, and specifically, we're talking about in the context of marriage. But I would go on to say that learning spice has actually made me a better daughter. It's made me a better sister. It's made me a better friend. Just this concept of like, oh, I can actually experience I can express intimacy in these other ways as well. And it really is it's a powerful unlocking that you're allowed to really enter into when you know it.
Yeah. And as you said, like, yes, it is to help marriages. And especially because when you are using a natural system of family planning, it does require abstinence. It does periodically, but it does. And so, how in those times of abstinence can you focus on those other types of intimacy? Because I know you have a story like this, Caitlin. Maybe we can go into that in a minute. But in those types of times of abstinence, are you when well, at least like the sexual intimacy, the physical intimacy is not necessarily there. Are you just 1,000 miles away from your spouse at that point for a whole week, or can we use spice to actually still come together in intimacy, in building a well-rounded intimacy, a well-rounded love, really, for the other. So why don't you go into what the acronym means and how, like practically speaking, how you can use it?
Yeah. So, like we mentioned, SPICE is an acronym. So it stands for the spiritual intimacy, physical intimacy, intellectual intimacy, creative, also communicative. intimacy, and then emotional intimacy. And there's just this foundational truth that I don't know who's proclaimed it like specifically, but I just feel like, you know, the sky is blue. It's a profound truth. I don't know who has proclaimed that, but we just know that to be true. And there's just this profound truth that in order to feel intimately satisfied, intimately united, intimately whole with your spouse, you need to be breathing and practicing and living those 5 different levels of intimacy. Imagine, if you will, if you were to have a marriage where all it was physical, but at the end of the day, when you were dealing with something difficult, there was absolutely no feedback and no holding of the heart, so to speak, of each other's challenges or ambitions or goals or successes, and there was just no room for those things. No emotional connection. That just feels so intimately void to me. Human beings just want the fullness. We want the fullness of intimacy. And that's a beautiful desire that I think the Lord placed in our hearts, to want that fullness of intimacy. And if you walk through Scripture, it's like the Lord gives that fullness of intimacy to everyone. And so, of course, if you're without one, it's going to hurt. And that's a little bit about my story. So my husband and I, we've been married for 14 years. It's just incredible to say that. 14 years. It sounds so cliche, but he is just gets better with age, you know? It's just,
Yeah.
man, the marriage just gets better and better and better, which praise the Lord for that grace, for that gift. But I remember when we were very first married, we were blessed enough to our diocese here, our Diocese of Phoenix. It encourages and actually requires that its marriage prep couples go through these marriage prep courses to prepare for the sacrament of holy matrimony. And one of the courses that we're required to take here in the Valley is NFP. And I remember Luke and we learned NFP, and we were so excited about it because we hadn't really had much experience about it, with it before. And, it was just this incredible, Luke saw it as like a challenge of like, okay, and I remember we were dating, and I remember him telling me, yeah, how did he phrase it? He said, yeah, I'm running this race, right? We're running this race of chastity. And I remember him saying like, yeah, I'm running the race of chastity, and I'm not going to give up now. That was one of the things he said, when we were dating. So basically his way of saying, hey, we're going to be chaste in this dating arrangements, And but it was interesting, that phrasing that he used, I'm running the race of chastity, and I'm not giving up now. And I think in his brain, his thought was, when we get married, then I get to leave chastity behind. Then I get to give up that race. And I've crossed the finish line, and I'm married, and there's no more chastity for me. And I remember, I'm jumping around a little bit, and I promise I'll go back, but I remember a conversation with a really intimate friend of ours who told us, he said, chastity doesn't end when you get married. You're just passing a baton. It's like, you're going to always be in that race, so to speak. You're just passing the baton. It's just a different type of run. It's a different type of runner. It's a different type of race entirely, right? It's the foundation of natural family planning. The whole concept is, a woman has these cyclic times of fertility in a cycle. She's not fertile the entire cycle. She's not fertile her entire month. She can't get pregnant at any moment. And so the couple is encouraged to learn, right, those signs. And it could be, any of the methods that she chooses, that the married couple chooses to learn, that they're charting their fertility with. Whatever those observations are, whether it's temperature, whether it's mucus observations, but the couple will chart those observations in a standardized way and be able to see very clearly that window of fertility every month. And during that time, then that married couple can kind of come together and say, okay, well, what is our intention this month? Do we want to try to achieve a pregnancy and welcome more into our family, or in our case at that time we were just married, so it was, do we want to start a family? Or they can discern, oh, you know what, it's not the right time, and that could be for a number of different reasons, right? And so there's this call, this challenge to, okay, well, if we're not going to start a family, if we're not going to build our family, then this time of fertility needs to be spent absolutely being intimate, but withholding sexual intercourse for the times when we're no longer fertile. When that season that correlates to our family planning objectives and intentions, arrives. And so there's kind of this challenge on every married couple who's using a fertility awareness based method um, to a call to chastity during at least that time. But also, you're going to practice chastity. You're going to have to practice chastity, really kind of all throughout the cycle as well, especially when you have children, or even before you have children. Someone might really want to connect with their spouse in that kind of way, in the sexual embrace, but their spouse is sick, and out of love for their spouse, they're not going to say, well, I know you're not feeling well, but I'd really like to. So of course, there's going to be chastity chosen there, and there's going to be times where a spouse goes out of town on a business trip, or on a trip to see family, and obviously that'll be a time of chastity. And so there's periodic times of chastity, but there's also chosen and sometimes spontaneous times of chastity as well. And you just have to get really good at being able to speak intimacy in those moments.
Yeah, and I also think too it's important to recognize that chastity is not necessarily the exact same as abstinence. Like
Yes.
sometimes it can look the same. Like
Hmm.
when you're dating and engaged, right? And you're saving that gift of yourself for after you've given those vows of saying I'm going to give my whole self to you, then you show that with your body, right? On your wedding
Yeah.
night. But I think chastity is this right ordering of your
Yeah.
sexuality. And so there's times of abstinence, right? But I feel like, okay, how are we should all we have a call to a right ordering of our sexuality. We have a call to chastity, and that's going to look different within the context of dating, within the context of marriage, within the context of your fertile window, right? And so, especially as you
Yes.
mentioned, when you are trying to avoid pregnancy, you are practicing abstinence during that fertility window, right? When if you were to have
Yes.
intercourse, the possibility of pregnancy is there just because that's how our bodies are naturally made. But then outside of that fertile window, though, intercourse would not lead to pregnancy. And so that's why we have this kind of ebb and flow of availability for intercourse if you are trying to avoid pregnancy. So, with that being said, during that fertile window, there's still a call to chastity. And so that I think really brings us back to this idea of spice. So, especially
Right.
maybe Caitlin talking about your experience, because I know you and Luke have gone through uh, just a lot of you've had a lot of experience practicing spice, especially within those times of abstinence. So, kind of talk a little bit about that and how practically you guys have utilized it.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. So kind of, yeah, absolutely. So passing of the baton, right? With what Luke had said is, hey, I'm running this race of chastity. I'm not going to give up now. So chastity, right? It's more of a posture of the heart. It's a posture it's something it's yeah, yeah, posture. It's a posture. It's something that you take, right? And then abstinence is an action in response to that posture, right? And I remember we were married, and funny enough, we were so excited to try NFP because, again, Luke saw this as a challenge. He's like, "Oh, my whole life I've thought, oh, I'm giving up chastity, I'm giving up abstinence, I'm giving up all of those things once I get married." And so he was like, "Oh, I see." So he took it as a challenge, like, oh, all right, well, let's go then. I can keep this up. I can, challenge accepted, right? And so we were really excited about it, and we entered into marriage really encouraged and really excited to try these periodic times of abstinence, um, with again a posture of chastity kind of threading through it. And we did pretty well. We did pretty well. For I would say probably the first year of our marriage, we were pretty solid. And then we hit that year mark, and it just kind of sunk in that each month, obviously we had a menstrual cycle to get through, and we weren't always very excited to come together at that time. Um, Me least of all. and and then we had this, these few days, and then this bigger almost week for me of this periodic abstinence, and it just sunk in like, oh wow, this is a lot of abstinence. And I remember at the very beginning of our race, if we're calling it that, if I'm continuing the metaphor here, um, I remember we didn't want to tempt each other at all. And so we'd enter a time of abstinence. For us, we were trying to avoid pregnancy at the beginning because we got married pretty young. And so we were wanting to, wait for a little bit. And to not tempt each other, we would kind of avoid each other during that time. We would go to work, we would do everything that we needed to do. We'd come home, of course, we would talk a little bit. We'd, cook dinner, we'd eat, but then we would completely go and entertain ourselves in different ways. I would go read or do a craft. He would go have his time, and so it was, preoccupy ourselves with musical instruments and other things to kind of keep us apart. And I think it was actually before the year mark, it just settled in like, oh, this isn't working, because we, that time of periodic abstinence was actually pulling us apart. We were not together during that time. And because we were trying to not tempt each other, we really weren't doing anything together to risk us, just, I don't know. I don't know what my mentality was at the time. I don't remember what my rationale was, but I was like, oh, well, if we can't be intimate, well, then let's just try to ignore each other. I think that was my thought. And what inevitably happened was bitterness started to build with this, like, and this resentment of like, and then became pettiness with this. Well, you don't ask me how my day was unless we're able to have intercourse later. Oh, well, you don't even give me a hug or a kiss when you come home from work unless we're able to be intimate later. And it just wasn't fulfilling that desire that we both had, the beautiful desire that we both had to experience intimacy together, in a non-sexual way. And so, or in a non-genital way, I should say, because right, in some capacity, we should always have with our spouse a layer of sexual intimacy. And it doesn't necessarily mean physically sexual intimacy, but just like this healthy sexual intimacy where, we love each other, and we adore one another, and we want to give ourselves to the other, in a lot of beautiful ways, right? And so I remember Luke. The stopping point for me was, I remember Luke looked at me one night and said, "Surely God doesn't want this for marriage." Because we would just kind of be at each other's throats a little bit and just nitpicky and
Yeah.
during that week. And I just remember him saying that, surely God doesn't want this for us. And then I remember him saying, surely the church isn't actually teaching this. Like, we're doing something
Mhm.
wrong, basically. And just through the blessing and the gift of the Holy Spirit, I heard very clearly in the back of my mind, spice. And I had forgotten about it because we were so excited about just learning about how the body works and the cycle of fertility and just what this means. And just, it was so, everything was so exciting mechanically. And I had forgotten about this aspect. And just thank you, Holy Spirit, for reminding me. And so we sat down and we realized, oh, we've been doing it wrong all this time. We're never supposed to avoid intimacy in marriage.
Mm.
We are never called to abstain from intimacy. Yes, there are times when we are called to abstain from sexual intercourse. That makes sense. It ebbs and flows with the desires of family planning, but we're never meant to abstain from intimacy. And so we had to sit down and basically we wrote out a plan, Luke and I did. And this is what I teach my clients. I said, I always tell them, we sat down and we kind of approached it a lot like how a vegetarian approaches their diet. Okay, so I'm giving up, right? A vegetarian would say, okay, so I'm giving up, animal protein. Okay, well, the body needs protein in order to survive and thrive, right? And so it's like, okay, well, how can I get my protein from a plant-based source? And so you have to supplement that loss of animal protein. You have to supplement with something else so that you're healthy, so that you feel good. And so just so Luke and I had to sit down and we had to learn how to supplement our intimacy with the other four avenues of intimacy, but also with other forms of physical intimacy,
Right.
that wasn't sexual intercourse or sexual intimacy, right? It was this ability to kind of still be able to be touched, but more in an affirming way and less in an arousing way. And so we sat down and we created a list. And it's simply what we did was we just wrote out the acronym SPICE. And we left a section for each acronym. And what we did was we said, okay, so for spiritual intimacy, what can we do when we're abstaining sexually or, from intercourse?
Right.
What can we do to build and develop and go deeper in our spiritual intimacy together? Okay, and then we would come up with 3 or 4 examples. Okay, now what can we do physically? And the truth is that um, there are so many beautiful ways that we can touch each other. Like I mentioned before, that is very affirming and very loving and communicates deep love and intimacy. That doesn't necessarily have to mean arousal, and that this touch is leading to something else.
Right.
So I remember asking Luke, I said, how can I touch you so that you feel my love and you feel affirmed, but it's not arousing to you? And I remember the answer he gave me was crazy. He said, well, I really like pedicures. and I mean, you're laughing because Luke, well,
Yes.
Luke. Like, that's such a funny response from such a manly man. And not that, whatever. Guys can get pedicures too. But but it took me back. I was like, oh wow, really? Like, you want to have your nails trimmed and be pampered and have your feet rubbed? And anyway, it's like this guy before we got married would like go into the wilderness for 10 days with like a hammock and a knife and some flint, and he'd come back and he's like, I almost died because I couldn't find a water source. It's like, and then he's like, in the same breath, I love pedicures. I'm like, oh, okay. So I remember I ended up buying a foot spa, and I started every month I would give him a pedicure when we were abstaining. And it was just a way that I could touch him. And I always say, if he was a dog, his tail would be wagging, his eyes would be rolling back. It was just so great. And anyway, and then we kept going. We said, okay, well, how can we grow intellectually together during this time? How can we grow creatively, communicatively? How can we grow emotionally when we're abstaining from sex and from intercourse? And we came up with a list of like three things each, roughly. Because and just to kind of, I'll walk you through some of our examples that we came up with, but something really well. Let me talk about the examples that we came up with, and I'll kind of go sequentially, in order here. So spiritual intimacy, the way that God designed marriage is kind of like a triangle, right? A marriage is a three-person union. You have God, you have the husband, and you have the wife. And you're going to get a little bit of my math minor coming out here.
Math
But
minor.
so if you consider a triangle, right, with the bottom being the base and the top being the point, kind of like a pyramid, right? Well, God would be at the top, right? It's a three-part union. So you have God, right? He's the top, and then you have the husband and wife as the two points on the bottom. And the closer any one of the spouses gets to God, or the closer you both get to God, right? The closer the spouses are going to get as well. And so there's this profound truth of when a husband and a wife really go after and seek a relationship with the Lord, it's just going to bring them together. It's just the nature of the sacrament of marriage. And so the question that Luke and I asked ourselves is, okay, well, how can we really go after the Lord when we're abstaining from sexual intimacy, from sexual intercourse? And we came up with a couple things. We ended up buying a what's it called? Like one of those devotionals. So we bought like a devotional specifically for married couples. And during that week of abstinence, we would go through the devotional together and take a couple of those topics, and we'd read them together and we'd answer questions. The other thing that we would do is that's when we would get a babysitter if we had kids yet, or we would just align with our schedules, and we'd go to confession monthly together. And that was when we would go. And then the third option we came up with is, hey, that's when we're going to head up a daily mass together, or we're going to go to adoration together, and just like really try to seek after the Lord. And so those were what we did spiritually. And then physically, again, yes, I would give them pedicures,
I love
and
it.
it's so great. It's so great. And I remember Luke asking me, well, what can I do for you? And I was like, well, I really love having my hands massaged.
Mm.
And so I remember, that there's hand massages, that started around that time, and they still persist to this day. It's like so amazing. And what's interesting about that is that then the time of fertility, like it shifted in our brains away
Mm.
from focusing on what we couldn't do, and it started kind of focusing on what we got to do. Because the trick in all of this is, as you're coming up with your list of 3 things per category, these are things that you can do, but in order to make this work, you can't do any of those things when intercourse is an option.
Mm.
These are activities that are specific for when you're abstaining from sexual intercourse. And so it
Yeah.
makes that time of abstinence really special, because it allows you to engage in these other forms of intimacy, and it supplements.
Yeah.
And so it's great now, because before what would happen is, in that first year of marriage, we'd get our first day of mucus, since we chart a mucus-based cycle. And I would tell Luke, hey, I saw mucus today. And in the past, in that first year, we would say, all right, we'll see you in a week, and we just wouldn't engage with each other for a week. And it started to morph kind of slowly, where I'd get that first day of mucus and I'd say, hey, babe, I'm in my fertile window. And he'd go, oh, can I have my pedicure tomorrow? And so, I saw this shift in him away from like this humdrum, like, oh, all right, well, blah, 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 on we go, to this excitement of like, ooh, that means I get to have a pedicure, and that means we get to do this activity. And so for the eye, right, intellectual intimacy, my husband is really big on planet Earth and the great
Oh,
outdoors.
funny.
as I've
Yes.
kind of alluded to. And he just loves, I think his favorite, it's Planet Earth is definitely up there, but I think his favorite is Bear Grylls. Have you heard of Bear Grylls?
Oh, of course.
Oh, this guy, he's incredible. He's amazing. He like, I think he'll go like, he'll use a dirty sock to filter water and then drink it. I mean, he's just
Of
incredible, but
course. Yeah.
survival. It's excellent survival. Anyway, so Luke loves watching his documentaries and Planet Earth documentaries and learning about all that. I don't find it quite as riveting. And so I don't typically engage in watching those things with him. But when we're abstaining from intercourse, that's one of the intellectual things that we do is I'll watch a documentary with him. And I make it fun for myself because I'll make popcorn and I'll put M&Ms in it. So I'm really excited to be a part of it. But also, what's funny is, I used to not ever really want to do those things with him. And then again, slowly, what was so interesting was I started finding myself really enjoying those evenings together. Because when you're really passionate about something and there's someone that you love, like the person that you love the most starts to like mirror your passion for that thing, and then you both of your just excitement just rises together. It's like, isn't that so cool? Yeah, that's so cool. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. Like it just,
Yeah.
I don't know, like it just hypes you up and you just enjoy it more. And so getting to watch Luke get hyped about the fact that a blue whale eats krill, like he's like, can you believe that the largest animal in the world eats such a small creature? I'm like, who knew, right? He's like, I know. And I'm like, that's amazing. And so it's just like, wow, they could eat like millions of tons of krill. That's crazy. I'm glad I don't have to cook that dinner every night for that whale,
Right.
It's a lot of work. Anyway, it's so I started really looking forward to it because I liked seeing the excitement that was in his eyes. But then also, intellectual, Luke and I both really love to cook. And so we ended up subscribing to the Food and Wine magazine. And it was actually our bathroom reader. I don't mind telling you that. And during the month, we would kind of dog ear pages that looked really good. And then when we entered into our fertile phase, we'd say, "Oh, hey, I got my first day in mucus," and he'd go, "Oh, can we make those Korean barbecue tacos?"
So funny.
Or hey,
Oh my gosh.
can we try this recipe that was, can we do the one that's on the front cover? It looks so good. And so then what we would do is we'd put the kids to bed early, or again, if it was before we had kids, we would just, we'd get home earlier from work and we'd go grocery shopping. We'd buy everything that we needed to make that dinner and we would just destroy the kitchen together. And we'd make this incredible meal. And then of course we were so insufferable. We had to photograph it. We had to,
Oh
so
my
we have a
gosh.
whole album of our, our recreations. And it was so fun to learn that together. And we both learned what um oh man, now I just forgot it. When you ice bath something, blanch. We learned what blanching was together. Anyway, we were like, what do you mean blanch the vegetables? Anyway, so got to look that up. So just learning together. And then creative and communicative, you know, the nights that we're abstaining from sexual intercourse, those are the nights that we're playing Battleship and we're cribbage fans. So we'll play cribbage, we'll play some kind of fun card game. Um, we yeah, we just have fun. Those date nights are really fun. The week it's so funny. Some of our we were just talking about this the other week. Some of our favorite date nights that we can recall are date nights that we had during the time of fertility in our marriage,
Yeah.
because we had to get creative because we didn't want to just have like a candlelit dinner at the house, or
Right.
whatever. We like, so I remember there was this one date we were in our fertile window and I was like, let's go. There's a lake nearby our house. And I was like, let's go night kayaking. And
So
so
fun.
we had so much fun. And I don't know what compelled me to do this. I guess I was just feeling really feisty. I don't know. But I ended up getting those like pool suckers, like the big long sticks that you like pull out and it sucks up the water and then you shoot the
Yeah.
stick forward and I ended up going to like a restaurant supply store. This is so weird. This is so weird. And I got like tubs of ketchup and mayonnaise and like mustard and we just had like a condiment battle like from my kayak to his kayak.
Oh my
And it was like,
gosh.
let's just like douse each other in condiments. Guys, so weird. But like what a crazy
It's
anyway.
memorable, I'll tell you
It
that.
it was that's the kind of stuff you get when
There
you're
you
abstinent.
go.
Anyway, but
Yeah.
we just had so much fun. But like we were like reminiscing about just like some of our favorite date nights that we've ever done. And they were all during the times of fertility because they're
Yeah.
creative and exciting and fun and adventurous and silly and laugh out loud. And anyway, so that's a super crazy side tangent, but that's one of my favorite things to use Grok for now, like AI, is like to go on and just like give me crazy, fun, silly date ideas that I can do.
Oh
And
my
it's just like
god. All
fun
of these
lists.
that is that's a great idea. I never thought about using AI to give me a date
Yeah.
night. That's been
I mean,
that's
oh yeah, I wish I had Grok back then because we had to sit here and kind of organically like, all right, what's a great way to show physical intimacy without intercourse? Now I would just pop that into Grok. Hey, what's a great way for married couples to have physical intimacy without having it be arousing or lead to sex? Boom, you've got 30 ideas, you know?
yeah.
And so, yeah, love me some Grok. He's great.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so these were the ideas that we came up with before we had Grok to give us reasonable suggestions. Let's launch ketchup at each other because that sounds like fun. Grok would be like, how about instead you read a book aloud? Like, nope, I think we're going to launch ketchup at each other from different
Yeah.
kayaks.
That sounds way more
Um,
fun.
oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. And then the last one, emotional. I joke with my husband. He jokes with himself about this, that he just learned what emotions were. Like that's the joke that we have is like it took him until he was nearly 40 to learn what emotions were. And so he just wasn't ever like in touch emotionally with feelings and how he felt and how things made him feel. And he knew this about himself. And so he actually told me when we were on this section, back when we were only a year into our marriage, he said, Caitlin, he said, I don't know how to connect emotionally very well. And so nowadays we could just go to Grok again and just be like,
Of
hey,
course.
give me some questions that can kind of bring out emotional, intimate topics. But back then we bought a book. Just again, by the grace of God, we were like at a bookstore one day and we saw this book and we were like, oh my gosh, this is the answer. Um, we still have it. It's such a treasure to us. It's called Questions from My Love.
Mm.
And I don't even think I'm sure it has an author, but it's just like one of those books that has like lots of blank pages with like writing prompts on it.
Hmm.
And so there's really not a whole lot of written content. It's just questions. And the book is full of these questions like, okay, so recently it was, what are your 5 favorite features about my face? Right. And then the one book, right. And then the one before that was, um, what was what were you, when did you know that you loved me? And what was your first thought when I said
Mm.
I loved you? Like things like that. And,
Yeah.
um, and my husband just would never, he would never consider to have a conversation like that. Even if we were at like a fancy candlelit dinner, he'd lean in close and he'd whisper in my ear, like, let me show you a picture of the poop I had today. Like he's just like, like he's just not gonna be like, he's not gonna lean in close and be like, do you know what I love about your face? You've just got the cutest little nose. Like it's just not gonna be a
Oh my
reality. And so what's been so great is when we're fertile, he'll grab that book and he'll answer like 3 or 4 questions. And it's so tender and it's so sweet. And I never would have heard any of those things if sex had just been an option.
Yeah.
And I never would be giving him pedicures and watching his eyes roll back in the back of his head and hear those deep sighs of contentment. Like I would never get to experience that with him if sex was an option, you know? And
Right.
like we wouldn't be learning these fun recipes. Like we wouldn't have shot ketchup at each other from kayaks. So, we there's so much that we would not have experienced if sex had always been an option. And I think there's something
Yeah.
profoundly real about that, where take your favorite dessert. I don't care. Mine's ice cream. I don't think I could ever get enough ice cream, but it's like at one sitting, but like, think about that. Like, people will go and they'll like work at an ice cream shop, and all they're dealing with is ice cream. And by the end of it, they're like, I just don't even want to look at ice cream. And then, and that's if it's always there, right? But like, even if I were to have a bowl of ice cream every night for dessert, there's gonna come a time when I'm just gonna go, yeah, I'm good. Like, I don't need ice cream tonight. I can have it tomorrow. It's always available. No, and then the next night, I don't really need it tonight. It'll always be about, I'll have it tomorrow night. And I think there's this real sadness that I see in couples, and because we have the incredible blessing of being able to walk with couples who are contracepting, who are in marriage prep or whatever, and they're not actually using the Creighton model as a means of family planning. Sometimes they're coming in just to check a box, a marriage prep box, and
Right.
it's such a blessing to be able to walk with these couples and show them the gift of their fertility and help teach them in a non-judgmental, but more like, hey, let me show you the truth of this way of saying, like, hey, if sex is always an option, it's actually robbing you of some of the greatest expressions of intimacy that you
Yeah.
haven't even discovered in your marriage yet. Like, there's
Yeah.
just this, like, when you're intentional about it. And I think that's the most important thing. I think if this is done well, NFP blesses marriages so much more, obviously, than always having sex available. There's
Yeah.
just this deepness and this richness that comes when you're intentionally building intimacy in these other forms of intimacy that you just don't get if sex is always an option, purely because there's not enough time in a day to do all of it.
Right. Well, and everything that the word intentionality just kept coming up in my head as you were explaining all of these different ways that you and Luke have expressed spice, that you've practiced that. And
Mhm.
because if you're not intentional, that's when the
Yeah,
bitterness and the frustration and those
totally.
things sink in. And so just the intentionality of going to AI and saying, "Give me a
Yeah,
good date night," like that in and of itself would, I know, just as a wife, that would make me feel very loved if my husband were to go and just be intentional about seeking to do something that still increases our intimacy, even if sex was off the table that night.
yeah,
I just think like and going back to your original thing of where Luke said, surely God does not want this for us. Surely this is not the plan for NFP, because if
yeah,
NFP, if charting your cycle naturally, if that is all of it's doing is allowing in that bitterness and allowing in this separation, of course that's not what God intended for marriage, right? And
right.
so how can this be practiced in a way to actually bring you guys together? And that's exactly, it's intentionality.
Yeah,
But that's hard.
it
It's a lot
is.
harder than just having sex on the table all the time. But I love that ice cream analogy you just gave of if it's always on the table, it's not nearly as enticing. It doesn't seem nearly as special or nearly as important.
Right.
Um, and yeah, the word intentionality, I think, is just laced into everything that you just
Yeah.
said. And clearly there's fruit that you that you and Luke have seen from
Oh, yeah.
being intentional. It's just beautiful.
Yeah. And yeah, there's been so much fruit. And I think the biggest fruit, is it's a very privately experienced and celebrated fruit, which is just this much deeper and richer intimacy that we have together. Because when you think about that, it really becomes this, like, it almost becomes your time of abstinence when you are using a fertility awareness based method, and you're practicing spice. That time of abstinence now becomes like an intimacy retreat, and yes, you're retreating, but you're growing deeper in that richness. And so, you abstain from sexual intercourse for those 7 days, but all the while you are just going so much deeper into intimacy each and every day with each and every activity, that by the end of that time of abstinence, you want nothing more in the world than to give of yourself to each other in that marital embrace and
Mm.
enjoy the fruit of that building of intimacy. And I've got to tell you, in the Mills household, Peak Plus Four is practically a national holiday. Okay. Like,
Wait, explain what Peak Plus 4 is for the
yes,
listeners
yes,
that aren't
yes,
familiar.
yes. It's the first available time of intercourse after you've abstained during a fertile window. So after
Mhm.
that fertile window, after ovulation has occurred, right? Once you're outside of the fertile window, we call that peak plus 4. So ovulation plus, peak, or
4 days.
whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
plus 4 days. So once you hit that day, right? In the Creighton model instruction, it's the evening of the fourth day is now that first available chance for intercourse without the thought of becoming pregnant. And anyway, it's like a national recognized holiday in our house. Like, everything stops. Like, the schedule, I don't care what's going on, the schedule stops, and that night is protected. It's like,
Yes.
I can't tell you how many times it's been like, okay, well, we have to do this thing, or there's a friend's birthday party, or there's like something big this night, and we're like, we're just gonna have to have intercourse before we go. Like, it's like, it's like, because we're not gonna miss this.
Yeah.
And so, our friends kind of know this. They joke with us because it's Peak Plus Four, and it just this doesn't happen very often. But I do remember on one occasion I was meeting with my small group, and my small group sisters are just, oh my gosh, they're just the best. And I remember telling them, I was like, hey girls, I'm going to be a little bit late. It's Peak Plus Four. And they're like, got it. Yeah, you take as
Got
long as you
it.
need. And then of course I get there and they're all like, hey. But like, my deepest friends know about this, of like, no, Peak Plus Four, like, no, you do nothing else, because there's just like this longing when you get to the end of those 7 days, or again, I'm
However
it's
many,
about
right.
it's about a week for me, but yeah, however many, there's this longing that you have since you've been building all that intimacy. And then what's incredible is we started to notice as well that there was a lot less excuses for not being intimate,
Mm.
because ice cream wasn't always available. So there was a lot less of like oh, I can't, I have a headache, or I'm just too tired tonight, or whatever. I mean, and those things were still realities. I mean, they would happen, but there was just a lot more, like you said, intentionality and just celebration when there were nights that weren't fertile.
Yeah.
And let me be clear on this too. Like, if intercourse is an option, again, like, I'm not going to be giving Luke a pedicure. I have other ideas in mind for how to spend that time, or if if intercourse is an option, I'm not going to be watching a documentary on blue whales. But it's just this, like, when we're intentionally abstaining, these are incredible ways that we can grow, and I can still, because that's what intercourse is it's a gift of self. And
Right.
so when I'm not giving myself in like that marital embrace, I can give of myself by giving him a pedicure. I can give myself to him in the presence of sitting on a couch watching a documentary with him.
Yeah.
It's still making a gift of self, but it's just a different avenue of that gift. But it's
Yeah.
received just the same, and it increases intimacy.
Well, and that's exactly the intentionality part too, is because those things that you outlined in the bullet points under each type of intimacy, they are reserved only for those times. Because if a pedicure was on the table every night, that wouldn't
Yeah,
be as exciting either. And
that's
so
true.
it is
Yeah.
the fact of being intentional of these are things that you only do during the time of fertility when you're trying
Yeah.
to avoid pregnancy, because that's what makes that time just that much more special than
Yeah.
than allowing just that bitterness or resentment to sink back in. It's that intentionality of what can we do that is specific for this time alone
Hmm.
to, first of all, make us excited for this time, because not too many people
Yeah.
are excited to abstain. But
Yeah.
in the context of where you are talking about having these activities that are reserved for this time of abstinence, that brings
Hmm.
excitement back to it. And also the Peak Plus 4 holiday. Like that is
Yes.
beautiful that that is a
Yeah.
holiday in your home,
Yeah.
because it's not just available at all times. I mean, yeah, everything, yes. Yes to everything you're saying, because
Yeah.
this is the key for a healthy marriage is it's intentionality, and also too just the ebb and flow of male and female sexuality. At least as a female, I know that in my body throughout my cycle, there are going to be times that I am more interested in sexual intercourse than other times. And so it can also it respects that ebb and flow of desire as
Yes.
well. And that's like a topic for another time too, but I just think that is also a blessing of that ebb and flow.
Yeah, I think perfectly on what you just said there. Absolutely. I have friends that kind of joke with me. They're like, "Wow, you have like the desire of like a guy," and I'm like, "No, actually, I don't. I do have ebbs and flows." And I remember in that first year of marriage, I had a lot less desire a lot of the times. I don't know. I think um, that's not rare. I think for women to kind of struggle with desire. But I remember as soon as we started doing spice, as soon as we started being intentional about building intimacy, I just I don't know, like that's one of the fruits is it just has blessed me with this higher desire
Yeah.
because I feel invested in. And
Mm.
it's almost like that time of that time of building intimacy intentionally during the fertile window, right? Because again, for us, we were trying to avoid pregnancy at this time. These are all anyway. Let me get back to my point in a second. I was about to tangent, but I'm getting excited. But that is for me. It was almost like a emotional foreplay where I
Yeah.
just like was feeling so loved on, so pursued, so desired and wanted during the time he'd give me a hand massage, during the time that we go to adoration together and he'd lead us in prayer, during the time that we would destroy the kitchen and make something delicious together, and the time that we'd play battleship, and it's all of these things that he was intentionally seeking me, that the rest of the month my desire was just there. And I think again, I think that's a gift and a grace from the Holy Spirit. And the thing that I was going to interrupt myself with and talk about too is this is also really great to use, and I love teaching this to my couples who are trying to achieve pregnancy, because they also have this need as well, even though they're not necessarily avoiding when they're not fertile. There are some times when they do abstain for a few days to build up sperm count, or to, or they've just ran a marathon of intercourse for their fertile phase, and they just get to the finish line of like that fertility. They get to peak plus 4 and they're like, "Oh, I need a break," and they kind of
Right.
fall down and take a week off sometimes. And so I think during that time when they're really trying to have as much intercourse as possible, and then they want to take a break from that, I think that time of taking a break from intercourse is a really important time to, okay, let's focus on intentional activities to build our intimacy. Because
Right.
I've heard a lot of couples trying to conceive who struggle with feeling like the intercourse is a transaction, feeling like the intercourse is a means to an end. And that's not, it's not untrue in the sense that yes, the way that you get your heart's desire of a baby is to have intercourse. Like yes, of course, like it's a means to an end. But I think the way to overcome that is to bring intimacy back in a bigger way in that moment. And the way to do that, I think, again, is to build intimacy on the off days of when you're not trying to conceive. Those days
Yeah.
when you're not fertile, intentionally digging in and building intimacy in these other ways. So I always say, hey, if you're trying to avoid pregnancy, do these activities when you're fertile. If you're trying to achieve pregnancy, do these activities when you're not fertile.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously come up with more activities at that point, because you're not fertile way more than when you are fertile.
Yeah. Okay. Last question, because we're hitting our time. But most of my listeners are women. How do you suggest? Let's say that there's a woman that's listening to this that's thinking this sounds amazing, but I don't know if my husband's going to be on board with this. Like,
Mm.
how do you have any advice for that woman to approach her husband with this conversation, with this idea? Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. I think generosity. I think we as people respond really well to generosity and to gifts. Um, I think we respond well to gifts. And so I think as a wife, if that was me, I would go to my husband and I would say, Luke, I am feeling a call to love you better and to love you more deeply. And I want to express my love to you in so many more ways than what I have been. And I would make it about me. Like, I want to give this gift to you. And so if I would say, Luke, can you help me thought jog some ways that you would, because Grok can give us ideas, but really we gotta make sure the activities are something that really communicates love to our spouses, right?
Yeah.
And hey, can you give me some ideas of what we can do and what I can do to really make you feel loved in these specific categories? And then you can have a deeper conversation too about kind of the whys behind that, and intimacy and intimately whole, and all these different aspects of intimacy. But I think I would start with that. Hey, I am feeling a call to love you deeper and more completely. And I would love to come up with a list of ideas in which I can do that. And I think there's
Mm,
going to be a natural response from him then of, well, what about for you?
right.
Is there anything? And then the wife could even just say, um, maybe, if it's a harder marriage, right? Like, if they're really struggling with this, she can lead by example. Like, I'm thinking about if Luke was so closed off to this, I would probably start. And I would start this, and I would do all of the spice activities I would be the only one making a gift of self towards him, and he would just be receiving it. So I would give him a
Mm,
pedicure, but I wouldn't get a hand massage. I would give him this, but there wouldn't be the volley back. And after a few cycles of that, I think it would soften his heart, and I think the desire would immediately be there of like, well, how can I reciprocate this act of love?
yeah. Yeah. And that's an incredible call to selflessness too, because I'm hearing you say that and I'm thinking my immediate thought was, well, what can I get? What can I if I'm going to give all like a lot of this and something that I've
Yeah.
really struggled with too that I've had to wrestle with is this idea of a transaction. Like
Yeah.
especially when you have kids, like in my season of having three littles, I catch myself all the time saying, "Well, I got up with the kids yesterday, so you can get up with the kids today." Like, you slept in yesterday, so I get to sleep, or whatever it is, right? There's this idea of transaction, but that's not a gift of self. That's just that's giving of my time in with an expectation that he's going to give that same thing.
Yeah.
And there can be, and that's okay, but sometimes, or at least in my scenario, in my case, when that isn't reciprocated, there's resentment that starts to build, and there's
Yeah.
bitterness, and exactly what you were explaining
Yeah.
earlier, with what you and Luke were experiencing before you were being super intentional. And so that call to be a gift of self without the expectation of it being reciprocated, that's an intense call to selflessness. But but again, I feel like it just all circles back to intentionality of if you can intentionally give of yourself, recognizing that your your gift of self is not meant to be a transaction, but it is meant to soften the heart of your spouse. Like
Mm.
that gives a whole new level, a whole new dimension to this call in marriage of being a gift of yourself. And physically, we see that in the marital embrace, in the active intercourse of giving your whole self. But exactly what Spice is explaining and showing us is there are other ways of doing that. And it really brings this radical selflessness, which can only bring fruit, right? Like
Yeah.
radical selflessness is a call to be like Christ, like to give of your whole self.
Yeah. I mean, and radical selflessness is the Holy Spirit, right? So you've
Yeah.
got three parts to your marriage, and the Holy Spirit is one of them. And so that radical selflessness that is the Holy Spirit in your marriage. And there's that scripture, right? There's no greater love than this, to lay down one's life for your friend. And that right there is radical selflessness of, hey, I'm going to give you the ultimate gift that you like. If you think about that, like laying down your life for someone, there's a finality to it. Like, I'm giving you a gift and you definitely can't reciprocate because I'm already dead, right? Like there's that. I think that's what that scripture means when I read it. It's like, hey, I'm giving a gift with zero chance of having it reciprocated because there's a finality. Like, I gave you the gift, I'm gone, bye. And so it's laying down your life for that other person. It's laying down your passions. It's laying down your desires. It's laying down the reciprocity. And that's what love is, right? Love asks the question of what can I give, not what can I get. And I think that's such a profound truth of like that you were just sharing is, yeah, like it's this intentionality of giving. And I think there's a natural desire, and I don't think it's a sinful desire. I'd like to maybe dive a little bit deeper into the theology of this at some other point, but there's this natural, beautiful desire, I think, of like the justice, right? How we're all made in God's image. So we have this natural inclination towards justice of, well, if I give this huge gift, I do kind of expect something in return. And I don't think that that's a sinful desire. I think that's understandable. But I think what's important is that we recognize that that's not a condition for charity. That's not a condition for love. I can love, and I can ask, what can I give? And then when it comes to the getting, I don't have to get it from that person. I can get it from God.
Yeah.
Like what the Lord sees me giving in charity to somebody, what the Lord sees me giving to my spouse, the Lord will supply me with what I need. The Lord will give me rest. The Lord will give me peace. The Lord will give me more energy to do an early morning wake up tomorrow with my kids again. The Lord will provide that justice, that return to me, right? The cup that you measure out to others will be measured out to you, scripture says. And so there's this fidelity of God to be the one who repays our acts of charity, that it doesn't have to come from our spouse. Now, eventually, right, when love is properly ordered, right, there will be a reciprocity there. But I think initially, if this is something that I can imagine, if my marriage was suffering in this way, I would be the one to start it. And I would just say, Lord, if I'm not going to have this reciprocated yet, be my reciprocation. Fill me with that. Be that component for now. Do not
Yeah.
let me want, do not let me want for love. Do not let me want for affection. And I would just sit with the Father and let him supply that until the time came where my spouse would. Because it will.
Yeah. Caitlin, that's amazing. Oh my gosh. I have a crying baby right now. So we have
No,
to
it's
we have to
time.
stop time. But I feel like we could talk about this for hours and hours more. But I just think I'm really hoping and I'm confident that there at least is one person listening to this who just really needed to hear that there is hope for marriage
Yeah.
in the context of intentionality and in the context of selfless love. Oh, it's
Yeah.
so good. But any last thoughts or words before we end our time?
Oh, I don't think so. I've just really enjoyed being with you this morning. This has
I
been
am
such a
so
gift.
grateful. Yes. Yeah. I'm so
You're
grateful
so,
for you,
you're,
Caitlin.
you're such a treasure to me, and I'm just so delighted that I was able to provide any sort of love and value to you. It's such a gift to be able to. You're such an ace. It's such a gift to be able to walk with
Thank
you
you.
at work and at the clinic and in life and raising kids. And yeah, you and Sean are
Oh,
incredible.
thank
So
you.
such a
Oh,
gift.
well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, Caitlin, thank you so much for being on. This was such a good conversation, and I'll chat with you again soon.
Sounds great.
Thank you for listening to the Truth and Fertility podcast. If you are enjoying this content, it would be amazing if you could leave a 5-star review. That helps me tremendously to be able to continue to produce these episodes for you. Remember that these podcasts are available on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon, and YouTube. And you can always go to my website, truthandfertility.com, to learn more. Thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you again next week.